Hello and welcome to this DCS FA18C lesson on engine start methods. Before we dig in, for those of you who are simply trying to auto start the aircraft, the default key combination is left Windows and Home. In this lesson we will cover three different methods to start the engines: battery APU start, external power air start, and cross-bleed start. Please keep in mind, for the sake of brevity, we will not be covering checks or bit tests in this lesson. The first engine start method utilizes the onboard battery and auxiliary power unit, or APU. The APU is a smaller jet engine built into the F-18 that can start using just the onboard battery. The APU provides electrical power for the aircraft systems and bleed air for air conditioning and engine start. Ultimately, the APU allows the F-18 to start independently, without external equipment like a ground power unit or air start card. This is the most commonly used method to start the Hornet in DCS. To begin, locate the battery switch on the electrical panel, which is on the forward right console. Set to on. The battery provides power to operate the APU, engine fire warning systems, ground intercom system, cockpit utility light, and integrated fuel engine indicator, or IFE. The IFE is located on the bottom left of the instrument panel and will be used to monitor engine status during engine start. Moving over to the left console, locate the APU switch and set it to on. You should hear the APU begin to start. Watch for the APU ready light to illuminate within 30 seconds. Once the ready light is illuminated, you are ready to start the first engine. Either engine may be started at this time. However, starting the right engine provides the aircraft with normal hydraulic pressure for the brakes, and therefore is typically done first. Again, on the left console, aft of the APU switch, find the engine crank switch. Set to R to begin the right engine start process. The switch will latch and hold in position until the engine is started. However, you may still return it to the off position if you need to abort the start. You should hear the air turbine starter, or ATS, begin rotation of the engine. Confirm this by watching the right engine RPM on the IFE. When starting with the APU, the engine rotation will reach a maximum RPM around 30%. The minimum required to start is 15%. When the RPM reaches the 15% minimum, move the right throttle handle from off to idle. Fuel begins to flow to the engine, igniting and driving the rotation to the minimum operating RPM of 65%. Once 65% RPM has been achieved, the right generator will come online and supply power to the right electrical AC and DC buses, and the right hydraulic system. With the process completed successfully, the engine crank switch will return to the off position. The APU will remain on until both generators are started, so you can repeat the process for the left engine starting from where the APU status is ready. Set the engine crank switch to left. The ATS will begin spooling the left engine. When the left engine reaches the minimum RPM of 15% as displayed on the IFE, move the left throttle handle from off to idle. Fuel is introduced and the engine starts. The left electrical buses and left hydraulic system come online. The engine crank switch returns to off. After 1 minute with both generators online, the APU will shut down. Both engines should now be online. This completes the battery APU engine start method. In the next chapter, we will learn how to start the engines using external power and air. An alternative to starting the engines with the battery and APU is to use an external power source and external air supply. This method assumes this equipment is on hand and available to you, and requires communication with the ground crew to complete. Within DCS, this means your aircraft must be parked on the tarmac of a friendly airfield. External electrical power can be connected to the aircraft bus system through an external receptacle on the left side of the forward fuselage. Let's start by contacting the ground crew and requesting external electric power. Press the communication menu key, / to open the communication menu.
Chief, turn on the ground
Select
power.
F8, ground crew. F2, ground electric power,
Copy.
then F1, on. The crew
Ground
chief will
power
acknowledge
is
your
now
request,
on.
then confirm once ground power has been connected to the aircraft.
Ground power is now
The cockpit
on.
external power controls are located on the forward section of the left console, outboard of the throttle. When the external power is applied, the internal buses of the aircraft are not immediately live. Set the external power switch to reset to complete the circuit. With an external power start, all electrical systems except those on ground power switch 3 are operative. A placard detailing each switch and the systems it controls power to is located on the left wall of the cockpit, just above the GEN-TIE control. Generally, the A position for each switch enables 1 or 2 systems, while the B position enables an expanded set of systems, including those enabled by the A setting. Set ground power switches 1, 2, and 4 to the B position and hold for 3 seconds each. They will lock into position and bring their associated systems online.
Flight controls. Flight controls.
An external air cart can be connected to the aircraft by the ground crew via a port in the right wheel well. The external air cart is equivalent in function to the APU, providing air to the air turbine starter, or ATS, for engine start. To request that the ground crew connect the external air cart to the aircraft, open the communications menu with the / key, select F8 ground crew, then F5 ground air supply, followed by F1
Ground air supply.
The crew chief will again acknowledge your request and confirm when the ground air supply is connected.
Ground air supply is now connected.
Locate the battery switch on the forward right console and set it to on. Note that the engines will still start with the battery switch in the off position. Locate the bleed air knob, also forward on the right console. Rotate to off. Contact the crew chief again, this time requesting the ground air to be applied. Open the communications menu with /, select F8, ground crew, followed by F5, ground air supply, then F3, apply.
Apply ground air
The crew
supply.
chief will notify you when air is being supplied to the
Copy.
aircraft.
Air is now applied.
Either engine may be started at this time. However, starting the right engine provides the aircraft with normal hydraulic pressure for the brakes and therefore is typically done first. On the left console, locate the engine crank switch. Set to R to begin the right engine start process. You should hear the air turbine starter, or ATS, begin rotation of the engine. Confirm this by watching the right engine RPM on the IFE. With the ground air supply connected, the engine rotation will reach a maximum RPM around 35%. The minimum required to start is 15%. When the RPM reaches the 15% minimum, move the right throttle handle from off to idle. Fuel begins to flow to the engine, igniting and driving the rotation to the minimum operating RPM of 65%. At 65%, the right generator will come online and supply power to the right electrical AC and DC buses and the right hydraulic system. The engine crank switch will return to the off position once the process has been completed successfully. You may now request the ground power to be turned off. Open the communication menu with the / key, select F8 ground crew, F2 ground electric power, F2 off.
Chief, turn off the ground power. Copy.
You may also elect to leave ground power on until after the left engine is started.
Ground power is
It's
now
important to
on.
keep in mind the ground crew stops applying air via the ground air cart when the first engine starts, so you must request that they apply it again in order to start the second engine. Open the communications menu again with /, select F8, ground crew, F5, ground air supply, F3, apply.
Apply ground air supply.
You can now repeat the process for the
Copy.
left engine.
Air is now applied.
Set the engine crank switch to L. Again, the ATS will begin spooling the left engine. When the left engine reaches the minimum RPM of 15%, as displayed on the IFE, move the left throttle handle from off to idle. Again, fuel is introduced and the engine starts. The left electrical buses and hydraulic system are now online. The engine crank switch will return to the off position once the left engine has started successfully. Rotate the bleed air knob from norm and contact the crew chief to remove the ground air supply. /F8, F5, F2. Both engines should now be online. This completes the external power air engine start method.
Disconnect ground
In the next chapter, we will learn how to start one engine using bleed air from another engine that is already running.
Ground air supply is now disconnected.
The third and final engine start method we will cover is called a cross-bleed start. A cross-bleed start uses bleed air from an already up and running engine in place of the APU or air start cart. It is worth noting that cross-bleed starts can also be done in flight as an attempt to restart an engine that has been shut down or flamed out. However, we will cover that in more depth in a future lesson. To begin, you will need to have one engine started using either of the two methods already covered in this lesson. If you use the APU to start the first engine, be sure to set the APU switch back to the off position before continuing. If you used external air to start the engine, make sure that the external air cart is disconnected before continuing. To provide air from the started engine to the offline engine, cycle the bleed air knob on the right console through off to norm. This will reset the bleed air shutoff valves and ensure air is being bled between the engines. Increase throttle on the running engine to 80% RPM and 1900 pounds per minute fuel flow. On the left console, set the engine crank switch to L. When the starting engine RPM reaches 15% or above on the IFE, move its throttle handle from off to idle. The second engine will now start. Return the first engine's throttle to 65% RPM and check that the engine crank switch is in the off position. You have successfully completed the cross-bleed engine start. And with that, you have reached the conclusion of this lesson. Please report any errors or omissions in the comments. If you feel this video was useful, please consider subscribing to support the creation of future lessons. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.